The other day, I did one of those things where you know you're gonna regret it before it even starts, but you still can't help yourself. I got into an argument over a Facebook post. Now, this post was a very legitimate post from a young person who's reasonably and understandably very frustrated with these insane, ridiculous student loan debt situations we're dealing with these days. We got millions of young people being forced into these six-figure, lifelong, crippling student loan debts that they'll be enslaved to for the rest of their lives. And per usual, there had to be a delusional boomer poking their head in the comment section with the typical classic delusional boomer response, well, you chose to take on that $100,000 student loan debt. You didn't have to, but you did. It was your choice. A bit ironic considering it's coming from the same generation that constantly nonstop bombarded you with this propaganda that you're going to be a loser if you don't go to college. Anyone who's lived in the actual real world and not the 1960s boomer fantasy land knows that the idea that you willingly took on these six-figure student loan debts out of your own free will and volition is an absolute joke and a farce. From the time you're a 5-year-old kid in kindergarten, you constantly get bashed in the skull about how you have to go to college. It's so important to go to college. How you're going to be a total stupid bum and loser if you don't go to college. Now, this is nothing against some of the wonderful teachers we have out there. I'm sure they mean well and they're just doing their jobs. But the system-wide propaganda is specifically designed to psychologically suffocate you into going to college from the time you're in kindergarten all the way up to your last year in high school. And we've all experienced this. If you ever even dare think about anything other than college, you're punished, outcast, and humiliated every step of the way. This is exactly how they manipulate you into being their economic 9-to-5 wage slave for pretty much your entire childhood. And that's when a really disturbing, unsettling truth hit me about all this. If there was a word to describe manipulating children into doing what you want them to do when they become adults, what would we call it? That's right, it's called grooming. So let's immediately address the elephant in the room right now. The whole Epstein situation, beyond being the sick, disgusting, reprehensible fiasco that it is also a very sensitive topic. There were real victims of real traumatic crimes against humanity here. And whenever we discuss such a sensitive topic, it's important to handle it with a level of honesty and respect to the victims. So is it really fair to compare this economic grooming we've all faced to this obvious, more serious crime? Are we potentially doing a massive disservice to the victims here? I actually deeply and thoroughly pondered this from a moral standpoint before making this video, and I came to the conclusion that actually, no. Actually, it's quite the opposite, in fact. Far from being a disservice, far from trivializing these matters, I think it's actually important to talk about it in this context specifically to raise awareness for the victims. And here's why. Economic grooming is pretty damn heavily connected to the more serious form of grooming. It's not one or the other here. It's not about comparing the two. It's that they're all interconnected. There's probably some exceptions, but generally speaking, kids who come from a poor background, whose families need the money, who are poor and impoverished, they're far, far more vulnerable and far more likely to be sucked into these nefarious situations than kids who are well off. And because they're so heavily connected, we not only should, we almost have to address one of them in order to prevent the other. Relax, relax, this is not an ad. In fact, we're proud to announce that we're actually not going to be taking any sponsors for now, and we're just going to be sponsoring ourselves with our new philosophical gamer merch store, Miranir, which we just launched. You can check out the link in the pinned comment below. We got a lot of t-shirts with iconic quotes from this very community that I know you guys will absolutely love. Now, of course, we get that in this economy, not everyone can afford to buy merch. So if you're enjoying this content and you'd like to support us, a simple like and subscribe would go such a long way towards helping us out as well. Thank you guys so much. You guys are the best. Now, recently, one of my favorite Spider-Man actors from my childhood years, Tobey Maguire, made headlines. Apparently, he started dating this young 20-year-old social media influencer who I guess is a year younger than even his daughter. The internet absolutely lost their minds over this, calling him a PDF, a creepy old guy, all the usual names you'd expect. Now, my personal take on this is I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's fair to call him a PDF for dating a legal, consenting adult, but it is definitely a bit creepy. I don't have a problem with age gaps in relationships after, say, the age of 25, when the brain is more or less fully developed. And let's just be honest, people wouldn't have nearly as big of a problem with this if it were the other way around. I mean, Charlize Theron at 50 recently had a one-night stand with a 26-year-old guy, to which I say, yeah, you go, girl. I'm sure that 26-year-old isn't shedding any tears over this. I mean, I'm sure he's not feeling abused or exploited in the slightest. But 20, yeah, that's really quite too young in my opinion. There's still a huge mental development gap between 20 and 26. Anyways, the main problem people had with this relationship was that even if it's technically legal, there's such a big power, money, and resource discrepancy between a 50-year-old and a 20-year-old that it's bound to create an unbalanced and a potentially abusive, controlling, and exploitative relationship dynamic. And I'd say they absolutely have a point. But I'd also say this applies far more, 100 times more, 1,000 times more to the modern job market than to Tobey Maguire's relationship. Now let's approach this from a hypothetical scenario. Imagine if you had an 18-year-old daughter. 18-year-old son works too, but let's just face it, nobody gives a shit about young men in this society, so it won't be as powerful of an example. If I had an 18-year-old daughter, which I don't, but if I did, yeah, I'd absolutely be very concerned about her dating a 50-year-old guy who obviously has far more money, resources, and power than her. But I'd be equally, in fact, maybe even far more concerned about her going to work for a corporation where she's going to have to work for and be exploited by a 50-year-old male CEO boss who's obviously going to have far more money, power, and resources than her. In fact, the discrepancy is actually going to be way bigger here. A CEO and a boss that she has to work for is for sure going to have way more money and power than some average 50-year-old guy with a normal middle-class job. And we pretty much know for a fact that he's going to use this power to exploit, abuse, and control her. He got to his CEO position in the first place specifically by exploiting, abusing, and controlling others. His entire job is to exploit, abuse, and control others. If you're lucky, he'll only abuse and exploit you economically speaking. But if we're all just going to be brutally honest here, the reality for a lot of young women in the workplace is that he absolutely will eventually transition that economic abuse into the other more nefarious form of abuse as well. Which I can't really say that word on YouTube, but you all know what I'm talking about. And sure, theoretically, you could report him, you can file a complaint to HR, blah, blah, blah. We all know in real life, 99 out of 100 times, ain't nobody doing jack shit about that complaint. They're never in a million years gonna prioritize your complaint over the billions of dollars the CEO brings in profits year over year. He knows exactly how to use all his money, power, and resources to not only exploit and abuse you as a young worker, but how to get away with it every single time as well. And this brings me back to that dreaded talk we all have to have with our delusional boomer parents immediately after we've just barely graduated high school. When I turned 18, my boomer parents sat me down, gave me the typical familiar ultimatum. All right, son, these are your options. You either go to college or you find a job, or we're cutting off financial support and you're on your own. Now imagine if you had an 18-year-old daughter. Imagine she starts dating some creepy 50-year-old dude, and instead of stepping in and being like, no, something is seriously wrong with this. Imagine telling her that not only are you okay with this, imagine telling her that she has to date this creepy 50-year-old. Imagine telling her that she's going to be a loser if she doesn't date that creepy 50-year-old. Imagine telling her that you're going to cut off financial support for her if she doesn't date that creepy 50-year-old. That is what your boomer parents do to you every single time they pressure, shame, and humiliate you into working for a creepy 50-year-old CEO who's undoubtedly going to use his vast money, power, and resources to use, abuse, and exploit you. Except it's even worse than that, because they're not just sending you off to any creepy 50-year-old, they're not sending you off to a situation where theoretically he could use his money and power to exploit you. They're sending you off to a situation where we know for a fact that he will use his money and power to exploit you, where he must use his money and power to exploit you, where his entire job description specifically is to use his money and power to exploit you. And this is just where I don't understand boomer logic. But to be fair, it's not really just boomer logic here. It's kind of just been an overall weird thing we just accepted in this modern society at some point. We don't want our young people to be exploited and abused by creeps. Yet we're not only okay with it, we encourage it. We actively shame, guilt trip, and humiliate them into being exploited to the absolute limit by economic creeps. It feels like the world has become one big, massive theme park for the elites, and the other 8 billion of us are just their employees. This is a common quote and sentiment I've read all over the internet, and something I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. Epstein Island was certainly one big, massive, sick, disgusting theme park for the elites, and in many ways, it feels like this current job market and general economic structure is becoming more and more like Epstein Island every single day. Part of the psychology of a sick and twisted PDF Epstein creep is this: it's not just about their own urges and desires, it's about power, control, and domination. They specifically prey on the young and vulnerable because they want to feel powerful. They want to feel like they're in control. And this is literally the exact same dynamic we've all felt from our asshole bosses and managers at work. I mean, the inevitable exploitation that's going to occur for the sake of profits is one thing, but think back to how many times you were forced to do something at your job, not even because it was economically necessary, but as a pure power trip fantasy control move to satisfy the sick ego of the narcissistic manager. There's a fantastic eye-opening book from the late great David Graeber called Bullshit Jobs, which a lot of you have probably heard of. Throughout the book, he does a great job exposing how a significant amount, possibly up to 50% of all jobs, are not even necessary from an economic necessity standpoint. The best example of this is one of those doormen at luxury hotels. You know, the guys who just stand there waiting like professional statues until some snarky old rich boomer on vacation pulls up, to which he then has to put on a fake smile and open the door for the guy. And there's really zero economic practical value of this job. The rich guy on vacation could obviously just open the door himself. Now, let me make it very clear, I'm not knocking the worker here. He obviously is just doing what he has to do to pay the bills. I'm exposing how the system has created so many fake, useless jobs that exist for the sole purpose of stroking the egos of the rich and powerful, just like we saw them do with Epstein Island. It's not just about satisfying some sick personal desire, it's about power, control, and domination. It's modern day obedience training. They need to exploit the vulnerable youth, whether it's physically or economically, so that they can continue to feel big and powerful. And I'm sure you've all felt this power dynamic abuse at some point working for your modern day boss. Another perfect example of this are the waiters at the more expensive luxury restaurants. It's always the establishment serving the narcissistic rich elites. Now, this isn't necessarily a BS fake job in its entirety. Obviously, somebody has to deliver the food from point A to point B, but at these luxury restaurants specifically, 90% of the job duties have nothing to do with actually being a waiter. 90% of the job is about standing around in a miserable suit, putting on a fake smile, pretending to be the customer's best friend, engaging in whatever stupid BS small talk, all this crap that has nothing to do whatsoever with actually bringing the food out. One time during my travels, I did have a positive experience that exposed how dumb and unnecessary this whole charade is. I went to a modest, small Chinese restaurant, which was one of those mom and pop shops essentially run by 1 or 2 people, and the waitress there was just sitting down, chilling, scrolling on her phone the whole time until I came to order. She then took my order and went back to sitting down, scrolling her phone until my food was ready to go, and that's when she came to bring it to me, and that was that. And honestly, that's just how it always should be. From a pure economic standpoint, the food was just as good. Literally nothing was lost from her sitting down and scrolling her phone instead of putting on a fake smile and pretending to be my best friend while we were waiting for the food. And this just goes to show we're forced to do all this BS ass-kissing, bootlicking, obedience training nonsense, not even for economic necessity at this point. We're forced to do this to satisfy the sick, narcissistic power fantasies of the elites. So I'm 35 now, and like many people these days, I chose not to have kids. Too expensive, too much stress. I'm enjoying my eternal millennial adolescence, so on and so forth. But that being said, I'm not one of those people who's inherently morally against having kids or anything like that. I'm open to the idea that I could possibly change my mind one day. And if that were to happen, I guess you can consider this something like an open letter to the future children I may or may not have one day. If I ever became a parent, the single most important thing I'd want to protect my kid against is a job. Yes, you heard that right, a job. Now, I would encourage them to go out and work if that's what they wanted to do, and if they found a job they enjoyed and that legitimately treated them well. But unlike our asshole boomer parents who constantly threatened to kick us out if we didn't get a job, I tell my future child that if you sense this job, your boss at this job, is becoming abusive, exploitative, or controlling, you need to treat it in the exact same way you treat a partner who is being abusive. You need to GTFO out of that situation ASAP, and you can always come home. In the exact same way I'd be there for you. If you had to leave an abusive romantic relationship, I'd be there to support you for leaving an abusive economic relationship. If there's anything the Epstein files have shown us, it's that this world is full of sick and disgusting creeps trying to abuse, exploit, and exert their sick, disgusting power fantasies on the vulnerable youth. And it's time we start doing a better job of protecting our youth from this sick, disgusting form of economic abuse as well.